All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth web session of the semester. We're glad you're here. Here in Detroit, Michigan, this is the first time that it's feeling like fall, and it happened rather quickly and abruptly. So I hope you're keeping warm if you're feeling fall where you're at. Today, let's connect in chat, share a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself and your pronouns. I see folks introducing where they're from. I see folks from Canada and Michigan. And then what do you prefer to be called and what organization are you with? And then if you want to talk up today's session on social media, feel free to use the hashtag xAPI cohort and tag the xAPI gnome. And our speaker today, Jason, is Mobile JSON. So feel free to share about what you're learning and talk up today's session. Hey, Chicago and Jersey, Ferndale. Oh, we're close, Peter. All right, let's hop in. As I stated, today is the fourth web session, and this web session is recorded. We record every web session so that we're able to share out the weekly web sessions to folks who might not be able to attend each week. As you know, Cohort is a pretty flexible, come-as-you-are learning environment, and so we want to make sure you have access to the information even if you're not here at the live web sessions. So we're all here. Now what? Today we're going to learn about how to set up an LRS, what to expect, and best practices for sending and examining the data there. We have Jason Haag here from Veracity who's going to share out some ways to set up a LRS. As of today, we have 541 folks registered for the fall 2021 cohort. It's really important that you register for cohort each semester. If you are just a member of Slack and just attending the web sessions, you're not going to get the weekly updates with the links to the videos each week. So it's really important that if you haven't signed up for cohort, go head over to our website, xapicohort.com, and make sure you sign up for the semester. We don't just sign folks up every semester. It is a step that we ask that you do. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We're in week 4. Today, behind the screens, you have me, Jess, and I'm the xAPI cohort, and we have Jamie, who is our esteemed producer and has been helping us with AirMeet and will help you with any tech issues that you might have. As a reminder, you're never too late for cohort. This is a flexible, come-as-you-are learning environment, so you can hop in and hop out as you see fit, and as depending on your workload and your capacity. So feel free to continue to invite your friends, and you can continue to join cohort and join our teams. I'm going to give a little overview, and I want to remind everyone that we give this overview every week because cohort is flexible, folks could be coming for the first time. So we do a little overview so that folks can see what our sessions are, what our sessions folks might have missed, and how cohort is structured. So cohort is a 12-week learning by doing project-based team learning experience and community. And this is our 4th week of the cohort. So we're about a third of the way through the semester. Every week we have web sessions here from 2 to 3 p.m. They're recorded and shared widely. The 3 places you can find them are in those weekly updates that, again, you have to sign up to be a member of cohort on our website to receive. On Twitter, they're shared every Friday. And then in Slack, in our resources tab, they're shared every Friday as well. And then cohort is also happening with our project teams. So our project teams are meeting in Slack and also working together on their own times to kind of build and frame and think about how their projects are going. Plus, we have that team GitHub, and today will be the first time that we actually do some team updates. So if you are representing a cohort team and you want to talk, I noticed that there's only one team up in GitHub right now, but you can feel free to put in chat if you have a team update that you'll be sharing out this week and you haven't uploaded it to GitHub. That's fine. Usually it takes a little while for teams to get used to using GitHub. And then again, we have our weekly updates and web session recordings that go out every Friday. that was too fast. So where are we in the semester? We started the semester with that broad overview of what xAPI was, how to send xAPI data from things that are e-learning, how to send xAPI data from things that are not e-learning. And today we're going to talk about that LRS, that learning record store, what to expect, some best practices, and for sending and examining that data. Next week, we're going to talk about a learning analytics framework. We'll move into bridging the Scorm and xAPI divide with CMI5. We'll move into data ethics and the xAPI and AI potential in learning. And then we'll wrap up our full content with the larger learning ecosystem and how xAPI fits within it. Then our semester will wrap up with a lot of demos and case studies so we can see how to apply all of the things that we've learned. So today we have how to set up an LRS, what to expect, and best practices for sending and examining data. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jason, who's going to give us some insight into how to set up an LRS, what to expect, and best practices for sending and examining data.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jessica. Let's see. Let me switch over and see if you guys can see my slides. Can you see my slides? Yep. Can you see my slides?
We can't see your slides yet. We're still just seeing your screensaver.
Let me try again. How about now?
There you are. We see you perfectly fine.
All right, great. Well, thank you for the introduction, Jessica. And thanks. I just want to say thanks to the entire Torrance Learning team for hosting and facilitating the cohort again. This resource is really valuable for the whole community, anyone involved, whether you're a newbie with little or no experience or at an intermediate level or an advanced level. It's really great to see so many levels of expertise involved with this effort. A little bit of background about myself. I've been involved in the learning tech space for over 20 years now. I've been heavily involved in learning technology standards for most of my career. I'm a former alumnus of the ADL initiative. That's where xAPI was born. I'm currently a partner at Veracity Technology Consultants, where we offer software and professional services for learning and development, including an xAPI conformant LRS. The cohort presenters from the past few weeks showed you all how to send data from your content, whether it's e-learning or non-e-learning content. And I watched last week's presentation, and Matt started to touch on LRSs briefly, because naturally you need an LRS to store your xAPI data. So this week I'll show you how to quickly get set up with a few different free LRS options, and then briefly provide some tips and resources on generating and exploring the data as well. So the scope for what I'm going to show you today is really limited to just free or trial LRSs that are already hosted in the cloud. So they're really perfect for the cohort to use, since there's no cost to you and it'll make the most use of your time. These systems don't require any manual software installation or overly complicated technical setup, and only require a few of the same kind of high-level steps to get started. With all of these free trial offerings I'm going to show today, whether it's Scorm Cloud or Watershed or Veracity Learning, the high-level steps are pretty much generally the same. You'll sign up for an account and log in. You'll create an application ID or credentials to get the LRS endpoint. The LRS endpoint is the URL location where the data gets sent or posted to. Then you'll configure your content or system. This is also known as a learning record provider. You'll configure that to send the xAPI data to the LRS. Then you'll go to the LRS interface and see statements, and we'll be able to work with the data, create dashboards, reports, that kind of thing. Just look at the statements, kind of what we'll go through today. I also want to mention there's some few open source LRS options out there, specifically Learning Locker. There's also one called Tracks, and also Yet has an open source offering coming. So why am I not covering those? From my understanding, most of you are all new to xAPI. So I want to ask to focus my presentation on providing less technical and real easy options to get you started quickly on your xAPI journey. So while there are some open source options for LRSs, these typically take longer to set up and install and more technical in nature to configure. It really depends on where you plan to host it. There can be additional costs for hosting if it's not run locally on your machine. So those are often aren't free. For example, Learning Locker has an Amazon AMI that's quick and easy to spin up, but then you have costs associated with using Amazon servers for hosting. The Tracks open source option I mentioned earlier, I haven't really looked at. I know it's kind of technical like Learning Locker, and there's a lot of installation configuration steps. I think that one's still in beta. And then there's news that Yet Analytics has an open source offering they're going to announce next week. So something to keep an eye on. So today I'm going to focus just on free or trial cloud hosted options. These are good for the cohort. We'll get you started. And so let's jump right into it. And I'll also show you some steps later on for exploring the data, even if your content's not already instrumented or set up to send xAPI data. There's some options there for starting to look at xAPI data in the LRSs. So first, we're going to start with Scorm Cloud. This is a Scorm player. By default, this was originally intended for. It's a testing environment hosted by Veracity Software. It offers a way for content developers to self-test their Scorm content packages, but it also has an LRS integrated, so you can easily also test xAPI content there as well. So let's get started on the steps. Basically, you'll sign up and log in at cloud.scorm.com. Once you've created an account and logged in, you can send the data to the existing Scorm Cloud application, or you can create a unique application ID that creates a unique instance for your LRS data. So let's do that. We'll create an application ID first for our LRS. Click the Add Application button. After you create an application, you go to xAPI LRS in the left-hand navigation menu there, and you're going to get the LRS endpoint. Make note of this endpoint, and that is located under the LRS endpoints tab. This is the URL I talked about earlier. This is where you're going to be sending your data. After you make note of your endpoint, and you need to create an activity provider and secret key. So you'll go to the tab where up there at the top where it says Activity Providers and click Add Activity Provider. You make note of these key values because you'll use those to configure your content here coming up in the next step. The LRS point with these credentials generated by the LRS is what you'll need for the content to successfully store data in the LRS. And here's a quick screen capture of an HTML editor where I added the LRS endpoint, the secret and key values to my configuration variables. In this content example, I used the ADL xAPI wrapper. There's lots of other options for instrumenting your content. This is just one I chose for my example. And note here, I'm using basic authentication, and I'm hard coding these credentials and the actor information just for this demo purposes only. You wouldn't want to do this in a real world implementation where you might use OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect or some other type of identity service that handles user authentication and authorization. Okay, so after your content has been accessed by learners, you've instrumented the content, you've given it out to learners, they go through the content, and then it stores the xAPI statement data in the LRS. Now you can go back to the LRS and view the data. In Scorm Cloud, if you click xAPI LRS, you'll see here you have some basic options there for filtering the data based on the actor, verb, or activity. You can also construct a query using the name value pair properties that are defined in the xAPI spec in that field right there that says TC API query, stands for Tin-Can API query. And that allows you to do some basic queries over the data. All right, next let's go through steps of setting up Watershed Essentials LRS. This is their free product offering. You'll notice the high-level steps are nearly the same here as Scorm Cloud. There's a few more options in Watershed though for exporting the data and generating reports though. Okay, let's get started. So we'll go to watershedlrs.com, sign up, and then log in with your username and password. Next, you'll click on xAPI data and then go to Add Activity Provider to generate the key and secret. The LRS endpoint is also displayed on the screen. So make sure you make note of the endpoint and the credentials you just created because you'll need that for configuring your content in the next step. Again, you'll update this information in your content. In this example, I'm using the xAPI wrapper from ADL. You could use a number of different authoring tools as well, like Storyline or Captivate or whatever. They all have a way to configure these credentials in the content. Again, basic auth and hard coding and actor name in here is for demo purposes. You wouldn't want to do this, again, in a real world situation. It's probably fine for the cohort. I'm doing a little pilot though. Next, after your content has been accessed by users and xAPI statements have been generated in the LRS, you can now go back to the LRS and work with the data. And Watershed Essentials LRS, simply click data and then data search. You'll see the general statements feed listed there at the bottom with a timestamp. And above that, you have a few more fields and options for searching and filtering than you have in Scorm Cloud. Also, if you want to search by statement ID and registration ID, so forth, and add some additional report filters. And then also in Watershed Essentials, you can export the statements to either JSON or CSV in case you wanted to bring that data into some other tool, like a business intelligence tool. You can also export the statements to and forward them to another LRS as well. Also in Essentials LRS, you can build some default reports. I think you have to upgrade to save those reports. There's also some more advanced dashboards and reports available when you upgrade as well. Okay, let's look at Veracity Learning. Again, this is the high-level steps.
We have a question.
Oh, sure.
Do you need to create a provider per learning project, i.e. I have 20 trainings, or do I need to separate those out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me go back here. So you're talking about on Watershed Essentials and setting up a activity provider. Yes, I believe that will create a separate data store for that instance. Otherwise, if you don't want your different projects and all the data from them mixed together. If you did want to mix together, I think you could use the default endpoint for the LRS. But when you create one unique for your activity providers just for that content that's sending to it, it's not a bad idea to segregate your content like that. Makes it a little bit easier for working with the data. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, go now looking at Veracity Learning. Again, the high-level steps and workflow are nearly identical to Scorm Cloud and Watershed. Pretty basic and easy to set up here. First, you'll sign up, and then you'll log in. Next, you'll click Create an LRS to create an instance. Veracity allows you to create multiple LRS database tenants, or what we call instances. This is similar to what we just saw with Watershed. They called it Activity Provider. Basically, this allows you to isolate and dedicate your xAPI data for different projects or sets of users or other purposes. Maybe you had a test environment versus a production environment and so forth. So it's a kind of a multi-tenant approach. Next, you'll go into that LRS instance you created and generate access keys. These are all, also known as secret keys or username, password. Each LRS instance or provider, Watershed, others, they may call it something different, but they're basically the same thing. You're going to get these keys, and make note of these as you'll use them to configure your content. In Veracity, you got to go back to the LR instance and get the endpoint. There's a little button in the UI for you to copy it to your clipboard, so you can paste it into your content when you're setting up the configuration. But basically, same thing. You're going to get the LRS endpoint and the credentials, and then you're going to go back to your content and update the configuration in there. And again, ideally, you want to use like a single sign-on solution, or maybe your applications or system support LTI, or whatever your organization's authentication and authorization requirements dictate to get their information. Again, I'm setting this up for purposes so you can have something to quickly start working with here. After your content has generated the data, you can go to the LRS and work with the data. If you click in Veracity Learning xAPI data, and in the menu, you'll notice there's a statement viewer. There's also a separate viewer for other parts of the xAPI data model, such as agents, activities, activity state, attachments, etc. So actually go and filter on those data, that data as well. And also in the statement viewer, you can click any of the filters. You can filter down by actor, verb, or object, but you can also expand the statement to view
Hey,
the full
Jason.
JSON. Yes.
Sorry, we have another question that came through.
Oh, sure.
Is there a way to define the course ID in an xAPI statement to avoid creating multiple record stores? And then what's the difference between an activity provider and an inbound data source?
Okay, let's go back to the first question. Can you repeat that one?
Is there a way to define the course ID in an xAPI statement to avoid creating multiple record stores?
To avoid creating multiple record stores. You should definitely define the, are you talking about the activity ID in a statement?
That would be, I'm going to wait for that person to confirm in chat whether they're talking about the activity ID or course ID, but maybe we talk about what's the difference between an activity provider and an inbound data source.
Yeah, inbound data source. So activity provider, by inbound data source, do you mean something that generates xAPI data? Generally, in the spec, these are referred to as learning record providers, and activity provider was the old an original term in Tin Can and early xAPI days. I think the general term now is learning record provider because it can be anything that generates xAPI statements. And it may not just be like a course activity or anything like that. Basically, yeah, same thing. Inbound data provider, learning record provider, activity provider, all kind of synonymous. Okay, I'll keep going until you have some more clarification on that other one, Jessica.
Awesome,
So,
thank you.
yep. So LRS, you can filter on active verb object. There's these little filter icons in there. The LRS also stores IP address, user agent, and how the statement was stored, whether it was via HTTP XHR request or using some other method. This is something that Veracity does specifically. For example, there's event stores, log stores, such as Moodle. There's a plugin for Moodle LMS where any types of interactions that happen in the LMS can generate an xAPI statement, and that's done on the server side. That is maybe an example of what we were just talking about a second ago, kind of differentiating, but those are also considered learning record providers. Anyway, there's additional metadata in the statement viewer that allows you to see that. There's also some advanced filtering options for all the common fields. There's a drill down feature that allows you to explore extra custom data you stored, such as context extensions. So in this screen capture, I used the video profile to store my data for this demo. I didn't pull up the content, but it's actually a video. And you can see all the extra context extensions that were stored about the volume setting, closed captioning, subtitles, frame rate, screen sizes, lengths, and so on. So you don't have to know how to query and look for those. There's like a little GUI that automatically will pull those down if you click context extensions and let you select the field. That's real handy for searching and looking through your data set. You can also enable a full text search by clicking the toggle button. This is real valuable for quickly filtering on data and using the display of that item. The display is a language-based property in xAPI data that provides a title. And so this is much easier than typing, for example, the full IRI for a verb, for example. So instead of typing that, full URL for the played verb, I can just type the word played, and it would bring that up using the display property. Full text search is available for any of the fields really that you enable that have a title or display in the xAPI statement. So that's a real handy way. You can also export the data to CSV or JSON, similar to the other options I mentioned there with Watershed Essentials, and then you can use those data exports in your other third-party BI tools. You can also do statement forwarding. I did want to also point out another feature for data exploration here. That's available in the free version. It's called the Activity Explorer. So this will display an organizational tree of your activities if the content sent such a relationship in xAPI statements. For example, in the screen capture here, you see data science is the name of the parent course activity, and all of the children activities listed in the tree are actually lessons in that course. That was done because in the xAPI statement, it identified that data science activity as a parent in relation to those lessons. So this is useful for initially exploring nested data activities and figure out what you want to report on. There's also some default dashboards that displays for the learner, granular activities, or other dashboards. You can configure all that based on a date range, and you can also create some custom dashboards. And finally, what if you haven't authored any content yet, or you haven't instrumented your content to send xAPI data, but you still want to explore some xAPI data because you want to explore LRSs and see what it looks like. It may give you some ideas of what things you should be tracking in your content. There's a free tool and each LRS instance for this in Veracity Learning. If you click Generate Statements button on the home page, it'll generate a few thousand simulated statements for you to play with and explore using the statement viewer, dashboards, and other tools. So that's pretty handy. ADL also has a free user interface for generating sample statements. You can use this tool. It's called xAPI Lab. To generate the statements and then send them to your LRS for evaluation. You can use the LRS credentials that are generated in the steps I showed you earlier, and then enter them here to send the data to that LRS. So this tool can also help you brainstorm on your xAPI statements and examine them in advance before you set up your content to send the statements. Always a good idea to do. It's real easy to make mistakes or realize what some things you wish you had done to your content later on. Hindsight's kind of 2020. If you can kind of go and look at that data in advance before you roll out your content to your users, whether it's a pilot or an internal pilot, it's always a good idea to kind of look at that data set in advance before you just add it to the content. Or if you're using an authoring tool and you have the ability and flexibility to tweak what those statements look like, it's a good idea to see what the authoring tool sends by default, because you might want to improve upon it. Okay. Also, I wanted to share another resource with you all on xAPI statements. I published this article late last year in Learning Solutions magazine. It discusses 10 best practices for forming xAPI statements. Now, these recommendations and practices were based on some of the most common inconsistencies that we've seen over the years that, if you address them in a proactive manner, they can drastically help improve your analytics. So check out this link at the bottom of the screen for more specific details and the benefits associated with following each of these practices. I won't read through them all, but they're all really good recommendations for thinking about designing your statements. Speaking of statement design in general, you should also try to reuse existing profiles when possible. In previous cohorts, I've given a presentation on xAPI profiles. If you want to go back and look at the history of some of those and where we're at today, there's lots of existing profiles that are out there already that provide statement templates and guidelines for implementing xAPI for a specific type of content or in a specific context. ADL recently came out with a new xAPI profile server where you can search for and reuse existing ways to structure your xAPI data. Another cool resource you can look at for profiles is Torrance Learning's Profile Viewer. I think this tool is also helpful because it pulls in all the statement template requirements across profiles into one place in a kind of nice bulletized summary. So if you're wanting to use existing profiles, or if you're developing some type of content that kind of falls into one of these categories, whether it's courses or serious games, audio, video, ebooks, performance support, or even simulations, there's some ways to construct your statements out there so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Okay, and that's all I have here. I will stop there and go back to answer some questions.
they're looking for the link to the sample data set, and I shared it from your presentation and the instructions as well. I'll share it again in chat. And those are all the questions that I'm seeing in chat. If there are any other questions, feel free to put them in there.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'm also on the cohort Slack channel. Feel free to reach out. I'd be glad to help anyone. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on any of these resources or any questions on xAPI in general.
Awesome.
And you can also reach me at our website address here.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jason. And if there are any more questions, feel free to put them in chat while we have Jason for a little while longer. I see one in the Q&A, so I'm just going to tee that up. Can you please go over a few example xAPI statements explaining the context object? And then there's another question that is kind of a follow-up to that question around multiple record stores.
Okay, let me switch over to the chat here. All right. Let's see, which one should I start with? I see, okay, unanswered ones, right?
Yep.
If I have one LRS and I'm working with 5 courses, each with a knowledge check, and the objects are labeled Q1, Q2, how do you know which Q1 is associated with which course? That's a great question. And that goes back to what I was recommending earlier, and using parent and grouping relationships in content. And if you look for in the spec, parent or grouping, it basically allows you to associate one activity with another, and you're kind of saying, hey, this activity, whether it's a lesson or even in your example here, how do you know which question is associated with which course? So you could have a question that has a parent relationship to an assessment ID, activity ID, and then you'd use a grouping relationship to associate that question with a specific course. And you could use that grouping relationship to associate it with multiple courses if you wanted to. Okay, that was Scott and Chetan's question. Hopefully answered that. If not, feel free to ping me via Slack, and I can follow up with more. Could you please cover a few example statements explaining context object? I don't have anything pulled up in front of me, but why don't we take that into the Slack channel, and I'll pull up some examples. And I'm guessing you want to have more around the context properties for grouping and some of the things we were just talking about. It's a really great benefit to adding grouping and parent relationships to content. That's one of those practices I mentioned in my slides too, because you can do some really neat analytics and dashboards around showing learners paths through content. If they started off in this lesson in this course and is all part of a larger curriculum, you could see how learners navigated through it if you design your statements that way and establish those relationships. So I will take that one offline in Slack and see if we can come up with some examples here. Let me get more information from you there, Chetan. Okay. Let's see. Does Watershed have a sample data set like Veracity? I don't know. You'll have to reach out to them. I didn't see one in there in the Essentials LRS. They may have something in the paid version. Are some LRSs better at working with some profiles than others, or should all LRSs work with any profile? Great question there from Martin. I will answer this in a pretty diplomatic way, in that a lot of the LRSs that are out there on the market existed before the xAPI profile spec was finished and before ADL came out with the profile server. However, so it depends. Like some LRSs will automatically render dashboards because they know how the data should be structured based on profiles. Some don't. You'll just have to go and kind of experiment with them themselves. So yeah, I think some are better than others. I can't really speak to which ones are which because I haven't looked at all of them in great detail yet or lately. All right, Angela asks, interested in pros and cons of different LRS providers, how to find the best provider that fits your needs. That's a great question, in that, what are your requirements? I just limited my presentation today to free or trial LRSs, given that the focus of the cohort, you guys want to quickly get involved with creating some xAPI data, sending them to LRS and being able to evaluate it. You may not have a engineering team on staff or have people that are technically savvy that know how to run these scripts and configure and install a database and set up a server. As is with what is involved with some of those open source options. There's a lot of different things on the market out there depending on your needs. There's LRSs that support cloud options. There's LRSs that support disconnected options, or that you can run locally on your machine or in your own environment. Let's say you have some data sovereignty restrictions. There, you just have to go and take a look at what's out there. So it really depends on what your requirements are for your content. I do have like a list of questions I can send you too if you ping me on Slack that will help you kind of arrive at your requirements. Okay, Brian Hogsett, what is the most unique use of xAPI statements that I've ever seen? Hey, that's a great question. I will say that really just in about a month ago, I posted an article on our website on our blog section from one of our customers that is using xAPI statements to collect interactions with augmented reality, an e-commerce solution used specifically for augmented reality. It's called Nextech AR, and they, for example, they have got a technology when you, I don't know if any of you have seen, when you go to try on glasses, you can do that online now. You can actually upload a picture of yourself or video, and then they will superimpose the glasses, different styles on your face, so you can kind of see what they look like on your face before you buy them. As opposed to physically going in a store and trying them on. They are tracking all types of facial interactions and interactions with these e-commerce augmented reality solutions. So that was rather unique. That's probably one of the most unique ones I've seen recently. Martin Tuttle, is there a best practice for allowing someone in your organization to query the LRS results? Can you set up a specific dashboard in Veracity that they can view to see those results for courses relevant to their learners? Yes, there is there's a lot of out of the box default dashboards that you can actually use, and you can set up right on your own. You can also configure some depending on what you want to query. So reach out to me, Martin. I'll be glad to set aside some time and help you set that up if you like. All right, and then Ming, is xAPI launch server recommended when setting up an LRS? Great question. I guess it depends on, back to my point earlier, and does your organization already have a solution in place for single sign-on or authorization and authentication? If so, you might want to use that or integrate with that. If you don't, and you don't have a LMS that handles user accounts and getting data that way, something I've often seen people use is an LMS, and they want xAPI data to get to be launched outside of the LMS, but they can use another spec called LTI to kind of pass that information back from the LMS to LRS. So it really depends on where a lot of different other questions back to you, which is, where is your content being hosted? How is it being launched? Do you have other identity services or solutions that your organization requires? If so, you should probably use those. Okay, Jamie, sorry, I missed somebody's question there. How can we create custom metrics, for instance, regression analysis? That's kind of a big general question. So you can create custom metrics, and these LRSs, they all do it different ways. I can only speak to how Veracity does it. You can create a custom dashboard, and we have a GUI for that. But we also have like a query language built on top of Mongo that allows you to query the database and depending on if you wanted to do some kind of regression analysis. Feel free to reach out to me and set up a time to get into more details for that if you like. Again, the focus and scope of this presentation was really on getting you all started really quick and easy with some of the free options that are out there. If you want to go into more depth later and to querying the LRS and doing some of the more advanced things with dashboards, I think that would be another topic for the cohort. I'd be glad to help support that. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in. Jessica, Jamie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason.
Yep.
All right. If you can stop sharing your screen, Jason, I'll be able to share our presentation. Thanks. All right. So now we are in our first official share out and update and status updates from teams. So thank you so much, Jason, for teaching us all about LRS and some best practices for viewing and seeing data in that LRS. So this week officially starts that second third of cohort where we're digging into details and really trying to dive into our teams. I did see some folks say that they're interested in sharing out about their newly formed teams. Feel free at this time, if you have a team that you would like to talk about today, to raise your hand. Jamie and I will be teeing you up so that you can share out. But today is the first official day of sharing out team updates. And we are excited to learn about the different teams and what's going on out there. And this will be the second bulk of cohort from weeks 4 to 8. All right, so I'm gonna hop over to the GitHub page that didn't show up on that screen. Are you seeing my GitHub page? Just let me know in Slack that you're seeing the GitHub page with the teams. I mean, not in Slack, in the chat, please. Anyone? Put a yeah. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so our first team is Team Storyline Beginner. And this person, is there anyone from this team that is here to give their update for Team Storyline Beginner, Bring Your Project to Life? Looks like the weekly update here has been copied from the template, so that's great. And we'll be able to just give an update. Oh, Martin can't hear me. Can other folks hear me? Can anyone confirm that they can hear me? Yes, Liz can hear me. Perfect. Is anyone from Team Storyline Beginner here to give an update on your project and what you're working towards? All right, well, if there is no one here, oh, Iona is here to give the update on Team Storyline Beginner. Can we give Iona some access? And Iona, please tell me how to pronounce your name.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Ilona. And this group, we haven't met yet. I only put it up yesterday. And the purpose of this group is to, in the spirit of flexible learning, is space where people who are complete beginners or some have some experience to kind of start from beginning, like get to know the tools, write statements, send them, and then see them in the a record store, and have like a own project, or we can just download a project from somewhere, like from eLearning Heroes. And I already posted on the Slack channel the great short video clips from Melissa Milloway, and we'll be basically following what she's teaching there, and then just seeing that's a couple of years old, to see what is there that what is new, maybe experiment with statement writing tools, and just supporting each other, figuring out. I think that the goal is that everybody has an experiment with these tools and hopefully are able to send something and see some results. So yes, please join the team.
Awesome, thank you for that. All right, and then I think we have Brian here to talk about a team that he's forming. And then I know Martin. Go ahead, Brian. Uh-oh.
Looks like we're having a little technical difficulty. If you just give us 1 sec, Jess is coming back.
Can you hear me okay, Jamie?
Yep.
Did I freeze?
I think you might have gotten booted, but we're not hearing Brian, so I think he might be frozen.
Okay. Okay, so maybe we pull up Martin while we're waiting for Brian.
Martin, if you could raise your hand, we'll bring you on stage.
I see Martin in the chat saying, raised his hand and the audio cut off, and he's relaunching his browser, so maybe we're still waiting there. All right, if we continue to have audio issues, perhaps we submit the update in the chat, and we'll look forward to getting that figured, that corrected in the future. All right, are there any other folks who, so Brian mentioned that he published a poll in the main Slack channel on 9/16. So go ahead and scroll up to see that poll about a few teams that he's interested in working on. And then I see Liz is saying would be happy to join the beginner storyline. Awesome. And Martin, if you wanted to put your update in the chat, we can update from there. If there are no other team updates, I'm just going to quickly remind you that you can create your own GitHub so that you're submitting your weekly updates via GitHub. And then I'll be using GitHub the same way that I did this week, where I pull it up. And this will just sort of outline your updates, right? So we can go to any semester and see how this functionality works, where we have the teams and their updates. It's really important that in your weekly updates that you're submitting, you include the date, because what our tool is going to do is automatically populate based off of the date. And then again, I appreciated this team storyline beginner because the weekly update follows this template. There should be a speaker identified so that I can call the speaker. You can raise your hand. Anybody can volunteer. And then each Wednesday at 5 p.m. Or sooner or later, but really just Thursday before cohort, ideally before noon Eastern Standard Time on Thursdays if you submit your team updates. And the updates should identify your accomplishments for the week, and then some things that you hope to accomplish in the next week, and then where your team might need some support. So this template right here is a perfect template to follow so that we can share those out. We hope that teams keep their updates to 30 seconds to a minute, so that way we can keep going through, because as you can see, sometimes we have quite a few teams that are reporting out within our 15-minute mark. And then after we go through our team updates, we get back into cohort business, and there are usually a few reminders that I go through. Are there any questions on how we do weekly updates, what that looks like, or how you join GitHub? If you need support joining GitHub, you can join directly via Slack, and you can always Slack me or Matt or Jamie, any of our team, and we can help you get up into GitHub and get your team page going. Are there any questions about GitHub and how to do your weekly updates? All right. So here's an example again of the templates. When you get into GitHub, we'll need your project brief or your description, right? This should be a brief 1 to 2 sentence that includes the question area or area to explore and a case or use case to provide context for your question. And then your team updates have the date as discussed, has your speaker name. It's submitted before Wednesday at 5 or before Thursday at 12, honestly. And it outlines the accomplishments, areas where your team might need support, and what you hope to accomplish. And then if you can include a team description, so that way we're keeping track of what teams are hoping to accomplish in the semester, and we can always go back and review that. To join a page GitHub, you can go over any comment and you go to those 3 dots on the side. And when you click on that, you go to join cohort GitHub, and you can join an already existing cohort team, or you can just join the overall xAPI GitHub. And then we'll give you access to the fall 2021 parent, and then you can start and create your team from there. With that, we see teams are forming in Slack. Again, to look for teams, use the notation with team in the front. And those are topical areas, technology teams and company teams. We have cohort-wide discussions. The main and resources is where I share the recordings each week. And then we have discussions and free stuff. So if you're looking for free access to some of the tools and resources that cohort gets access to, feel free to use that demos and vendors offer. And then it looks like Martin is ready to give his update. So I can go ahead, Martin, you can give your update, and then we'll just wrap up. If you actually, Martin, it might be, go ahead. There you are, I see you. And I hear you.
Okay, good. I finally got the audio back. Okay, I just created, it's called Team CMI5 Create AU, and AU is assignable unit. So there's a project called Catapult done by ADL and I think Rostiki software, if I'm saying that right. And they're creating a player that you can use to create CMI5 packages to test against. And they also have sample content of CMI5 packages, and they also have test suites. And I just want to learn more about CMI5, so I was thinking maybe we can get a team together that can create something and try and play it in the CMI5 player, so we can just sort of get in to learn the ins and outs of it. I have some ideas how to do it based on what we did with live code before, but if someone else has other ways they want to do it or whatever, but if there's any people interested in that part of it, because it's right now, I think it just launched this week using that, so it would be a good opportunity to kick the tires and try it out and maybe learn a bit more.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. So I put the team channel there, and Matt put the channel, a Slack channel there as well. So feel free to take a look and join that team if you're interested. Just some good stuff to know and some reminders for the week. We're meeting here every week on AirMeet at 2:00 p.m. Eastern time. And if you are not available during our weekly times, don't worry. We send out the recordings every week in our weekly updates on Twitter and in Slack. Again, reminder, if you are not receiving the weekly updates via email, that might mean that you haven't signed up for Cohort, and you can do that online at xapicohort.com. Next week, we have Megan Torrance presenting a learning analytics framework. I want to put a plug for our xAPI party, which sounds like a party, but it's more like a conference. It's online, and you can learn more on our website. As always, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can email xapicohort@torrancelearning.com or send me a message in Slack. With that, have a wonderful, wonderful Thursday, and I hope that you have a great weekend and are keeping warm wherever you are. Have a great day, folks.